She lent her last, muy to a stranger in the rain, unaware the broke man was a disguised millionaire testing kindness. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's video, I need your help. We have noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It is quick, free, and it allows us to continue bringing you meaningful stories every single week. Your support truly means everything. Let us keep this channel growing together. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below so we know where our community is spreading from. Thank you so much for being here. Now, let us get back to our main character. She had only $10 left, so why did she give it away to a stranger she had never met? The rain poured down in cold sheets that afternoon, drumming against the cracked roof of the downtown train station. Under the dim lights, Grace Walker tightened her worn trench coat around her thin frame. Her shoes were soaked through, her fingers red from the chill. In her pocket, a single $10 bill was folded tight, the last of her money, until her next paycheck, if she ever got one. She was on her way to a job interview that could decide everything. The bus ride, the walk through the storm, the ruined resume, each step felt heavier. She whispered to herself, "Come on, Grace, just one more chance." Then came a quiet voice behind her. "Excuse me, ma'am. I am sorry to bother you." Grace turned. A man stood a few feet away beneath the flickering platform light. His beard was overgrown, his jacket torn at the sleeve, water dripping from his hair. He looked exhausted, but his eyes calm, blue, and strangely gentle met hers with a mix of hope and shame. "I had my wallet stolen," he said softly. "I just need $10 for a ticket home. I swear I will pay you back if you can trust me." Grace hesitated. $10 was not much, but it was all she had. Her stomach twisted as she felt the damp bill through the lining of her coat pocket. The train roared somewhere in the distance. She could walk away. She should walk away. Yet something in the man's trembling hands and quiet honesty made her stop. "Do you have anyone you can call?" she asked. He shook his head. No one who would answer. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Rain filled the silence like an unspoken question between strangers. Then, without fully understanding why, Grace reached into her pocket. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Here. It is not much, but maybe it will help you get home." The man stared at her hand as if it were something sacred. Slowly, he took the bill. "Thank you," he said, his voice breaking. "You did not have to do that." Grace smiled faintly. "Just make sure you get where you need to go." The next train hissed to a stop. He stepped aboard, still glancing back at her through the rain-streaked glass. Then he was gone. Grace stood alone on the platform, cold and uncertain, watching the last of her $10 disappear into the mist. She pulled her coat tighter and whispered to herself, "What have I done?" What she did not know was that the man she had just helped was no ordinary stranger. He was Daniel Hayes, a hidden millionaire, walking the city in disguise, searching for a single act of real kindness. The next morning, the rain had finally stopped, but the sky still carried that pale, washed-out gray that made the city feel colder than it was. Grace Walker sat at the small counter of a corner diner, hands wrapped around a cup of cheap coffee that had long gone cold. She stared out the window, watching people hurry by, umbrellas tucked under their arms, faces bright with purpose. She had none left. Her job interview had been canceled because she had arrived late, soaked through and shaking. The receptionist had smiled politely, then said, "We have filled the position, but thank you for coming." Grace had walked back through the drizzle, shoes squishing with each step, and realized she had just given away her last chance and her last $10. That night she returned to her rented room only to find the landlord waiting outside her door. "Grace, rent was due 3 days ago," he said, his tone not cruel but final. "I am sorry, but I cannot keep holding the room." She nodded silently. There was no point arguing. She packed her small suitcase, a few clothes, her sketchbook, and the now empty wallet. By midnight, she was standing at a bus shelter, clutching her suitcase like a lifeline. Over the next few days, Grace drifted through the city, searching for day jobs, scanning notice boards, walking until her feet ached. She spent a night in a 24-hour library, pretending to study just to stay warm. When the guards asked her to leave, she moved to a public bench near the river. The cold crept into her. Bones, and her reflection in the dark water stared back like a stranger. Sometimes she wondered what had happened to that man from the train station. Had he really bought a ticket home? Did he even exist beyond that moment? She wanted to believe she had helped someone who needed it, yet doubt whispered louder. Maybe he lied. Maybe I was a fool. One evening, when her stomach had not felt food for a day and a half, Grace wandered into a quiet street lined with closed shops. A soft, gentle voice stopped her. "You look cold, dear." She turned. An elderly woman stood in a doorway, holding a paper bag that smelled faintly of fresh bread. Her silver hair was tucked under a knitted hat, her eyes kind but sharp with recognition of hunger. "I am fine," Grace said automatically, forcing a smile. The woman shook her head. "You do not look fine. Sit down for a moment." She handed her the bag. Inside was a thick sandwich, slightly uneven, made by someone who still believed food should taste like care. Grace hesitated, pride fighting with need. "Take it," the woman said softly. "You remind me of someone I once was." Grace's fingers trembled as she accepted it. The first bite made her throat tighten. "Thank you," she whispered. The woman smiled. "There is a soup kitchen 2 blocks down, on Monroe Street. They serve lunch to anyone who needs it. Tell them Ruth sent you." Before Grace could answer, the woman had already started walking away, her umbrella bright red against the fading sky. The next morning, Grace followed the directions and found the building, an old brick hall with a faded sign that read, "Hope Table." Inside, the air smelled of broth and bread. People moved quietly, serving, washing, eating. For the first time in weeks, Grace felt a strange comfort in the noise. She asked for Carol, as Ruth had told her. A middle-aged woman with rolled-up sleeves looked up from behind a counter. "Ruth sent you?" "Yes," Grace said, clutching her suitcase. "She said you might need help." Carol studied her for a moment, then nodded. "We always need hands. Can you work today?" Grace nodded quickly. "Yes, anything." "Good," Carol said, handing her an apron. "Start by wiping those tables. You will get a meal after the shift." Grace slipped on the apron and began cleaning. Her movements were slow at first, uncertain, but with each table wiped and each plate collected, a small part of her steadied. The chatter, the clinking bowls, the smell of soup, they filled a silence that had been haunting her for too long. By the time she sat down to eat, steam rising from her bowl, she realized she was no longer invisible. People smiled at her, said, "Thank you," and meant it. She exhaled, feeling something she had not felt in weeks' peace. But outside the window, parked across the street, a sleek black sedan had been waiting quietly. Inside sat a man with calm blue eyes, watching through the rain-specked glass. He did not move. He only smiled faintly when he saw her laughing with the volunteers. Then he whispered to himself, "I found her." The same man Grace had helped at the train station. Daniel Hayes. The following afternoon, the soup kitchen was busier than usual. The air carried the scent of tomato stew and cornbread, and laughter drifted between the clatter of bowls. Grace Walker moved from table to table, wiping counters, refilling cups, smiling when someone said thank you. Her body ached, but her heart felt lighter than it had in weeks. When the crowd thinned, she noticed the front door swing open. A man stepped in, tall, dressed in a dark tailored coat that did not belong in a place like this. His shoes were polished, his presence quiet but commanding. Grace paused, the rag in her hand frozen mid-air. There was something about him, the stillness, the calm in his face that stirred a strange familiarity. He looked around the room, scanning every corner, until his eyes met hers. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. The man smiled gently. "Hello," he said. Grace blinked. "Do I know you?" He took a few steps closer, his voice soft but steady. "You once gave a stranger $10 at the train station, in the rain." Her breath caught. The memory came rushing back, the flickering lights, the trembling hands, the soaked jacket. "That was you," she whispered. He nodded. "It was. My name is Daniel Hayes." He reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope, then handed it to her. "You gave me your last $10. I came to return it." Grace stared at the envelope, confused. Inside was a crisp bill, but attached to it was a simple business card. Daniel Hayes, founder Hayes Foundation. Her lips parted in disbelief. You are a millionaire. He smiled faintly. Titles are overrated. I was walking the city undercover, studying how people react when wealth is invisible. Most people looked away. You did not. Grace shook her head slowly, still processing. I did not help you for money. I know, he said. That is why I am here. The noise around them faded as the moment settled between them. Daniel continued, We are opening a new initiative under my foundation programs that help people rebuild their lives through real work, not handouts. I would like you to join us. Grace frowned slightly. Join you? I do not even have a home address. You have what matters, Daniel said. Compassion. You see people when no one else does. That is what my team needs. Grace's instinct was to refuse. The offer sounded unreal, too generous, but the way he spoke calm, respectful, as if he had been searching for her specifically, made her pause. I do not have any qualifications, she said quietly. I was just trying to survive. Daniel smiled, his voice warm. Survival teaches more than any classroom. Let me give you a chance to start again. He placed a folded sheet of paper on the counter. It was a short-term contract training for community coordination, a small stipend, and temporary housing provided by the foundation. Grace looked up, unsure. Why me? Daniel's gaze softened. Because you gave when you had nothing. People like that build the kind of world I want to fund. She felt her throat tighten. For so long, she had been the one asking for a chance. Now, someone was offering her one without asking for anything in return. Grace nodded slowly. All right, I will do it. Daniel extended his hand. Welcome aboard, Grace. When their hands met, it was brief but steady, no pity, no charity, just respect. For the first time in months, she felt seen. Later that evening, as she packed her few belongings in the small room behind the soup kitchen, she noticed a folded note tucked under the envelope he had given her. It read, Every act of kindness has a ripple. Tomorrow, let us make it a wave. Grace smiled through tears. She slipped the note into her pocket and whispered, Maybe the rain was never meant to wash me away. Maybe it was meant to wash me clean. Across town, Daniel sat in his office overlooking the city lights, watching the rain return in thin silver streaks. On his desk, under a glass frame, lay the original crumpled $10 bill Grace had given him. He traced a finger over it and said softly, Tomorrow, she begins. 2 weeks later, Grace Walker stood in the lobby of the Hayes Foundation, holding a new identification badge that still felt unreal in her hands. The building was glass and steel, glowing with light. She caught her reflection in one of the window's neat blouse, borrowed blazer, a nervous smile that looked out of place in this world of confidence and polish. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and paper. People moved with purpose, voices low but steady. A woman with sleek hair and a clipboard approached her. Grace Walker, I am Lena, orientation lead. Welcome to the team. Grace smiled politely, following as Lena guided her through the floor. We run 3 main projects, Lena explained. Housing reform, job placement, and community care. You will start in outreach, basic coordination, field reporting, meeting volunteers. Grace nodded, trying to absorb everything. Each department buzzed with motion. Every office filled with people typing, planning, deciding the future of lives like hers had once been. By the end of the day, Lena introduced her to Daniel's assistant, a quiet man named Adrian. Mr. Hayes is in meetings until late, he said, but he asked me to make sure you have everything you need. Grace thanked him. She still did not fully understand why Daniel had chosen her, but the thought of disappointing him made her stand straighter. That evening, when most employees had gone home, Grace lingered in the break room, sorting files for tomorrow's meeting. Through the glass wall, she saw Daniel walking down the hallway. He stopped when he noticed her, his expression softening. You are still here, he said. Grace straightened. I wanted to make sure the reports were organized for the morning. Daniel smiled faintly. You remind me of someone I used to know, a person who believed that effort could heal anything. Grace lowered her gaze, unsure what to say. I just want to be useful. You already are, he said quietly. You changed more than one life that night at the train station. Their eyes met for a moment, warm, calm, unspoken understanding passing between them. Then Daniel glanced at the stack of files. "Come by my office tomorrow. I would like to show you something." The next day, Daniel led her through a restricted floor that opened into a large workspace filled with blueprints, laptops, and a model of a small food truck painted with bright colors. "This," Daniel said, "is Open Hands. It is a mobile kitchen project that brings hot meals to homeless neighborhoods. We have been developing it quietly for months. I think you should run it." Grace froze. "Run it? I just started." Daniel nodded. "You understand what it means to be hungry, invisible, and still show kindness. That perspective cannot be taught." She looked down at the design. "I do not know how to manage something like this. I will guide you," Daniel said, "and you will not be alone. Leadership is not about knowing everything. It is about remembering why you started." Grace felt her chest tighten. "You really believe I can do this?" He smiled. "I would not offer it if I did not." Over the next few days, Grace threw herself into the project. She spent hours drafting routes, contacting local suppliers, and recruiting volunteers from the same shelters she once stayed in. Every small success felt like reclaiming a part of her that life had tried to take away. At night, when the office lights dimmed, Daniel often stopped by the workspace. Sometimes they talked about logistics, sometimes about nothing at all: music, books, the weather. But every conversation carried an ease that neither of them expected. One evening, as they reviewed the first printed banner with the Open Hands logo, Daniel paused beside her. "When this launches," he said softly, "I want people to see more than charity. I want them to see humanity. That was your lesson to me." Grace turned to him, eyes glimmering in the soft office light. "Then let us make sure they do." Outside the window, the city glowed in gold and silver, and for the first time in years, Grace felt like she was standing on solid ground. She did not know it yet, but this was the beginning of something far larger, something that would not only change her life, but his as well. The launch day of Open Hands arrived beneath a clear blue sky. The courtyard outside the Hayes Foundation buzzed, with reporters, volunteers, and curious onlookers. Food trucks lined the street, each painted in bright shades of orange and yellow, with the words, "Open Hands, meals that find you." Grace Walker stood in front of them, her palms sweating despite the cool breeze. Daniel Hayes walked over, adjusting his tie, his expression calm but proud. "Are you ready?" he asked. Grace exhaled slowly. "As ready as I will ever be." He smiled. "Then let us begin." When Grace stepped up to the podium, cameras clicked in rapid flashes. Her voice trembled at first, but steadied as she looked out at the volunteers, people from shelters, from kitchens, from the streets she once slept on. "A year ago," she began, "I was standing at a train station with $10 left to my name. I thought that was the end of my story. But someone taught me that kindness never disappears, it only travels, finding its way back when you least expect it." A hush settled over the crowd. Daniel's gaze lingered on her, quiet admiration in his eyes. Grace continued, "Today, these trucks will drive across the city to bring food and hope to anyone who needs it, not as a handout, but as a hand extended, because sometimes all a person needs to stand again is one act of grace." Applause erupted, rolling through the courtyard like thunder. Daniel stepped beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder as she stepped away from the podium. "You spoke like you have been doing this your whole life," he said softly. She smiled, her eyes glistening. "Maybe I have. I just did not know it." Throughout the day, the Open Hands trucks rolled out one by one, greeted by cheers and camera flashes. Grace rode in the lead truck, handing out meals, shaking hands, and listening to the stories of people who reminded her of herself. The scent of soup filled the air, and laughter echoed through streets that once felt so silent. By evening, the event had gone viral. News. Anchors praised the project as a model of community renewal, but not everyone was kind. Inside the foundation, whispers began to stir. "She is just a charity case he took pity on," one employee murmured near the elevator. "A girl with no background running a major initiative? That is not strategy, it is sentiment." Grace heard fragments of the gossip as she passed by. Her chest tightened, but she kept walking, pretending not to notice. Later that night, she stayed late to clean up the leftover files and donation boxes. Alone in the quiet office, she felt the old doubt return. whispering that maybe she did not belong here after all. She turned off the lights and headed to Daniel's office to drop off the day's summary. The door was slightly open, warm light spilling into the hallway. On his desk, framed beneath the lamp, was the same crumpled $10 bill she had once given him, now preserved behind glass. Written below it was a small brass plaque. Kindness begins with her. Grace froze, the sight catching her breath. All the fear and exhaustion that had been building inside her melted into silence. Daniel looked up from his paperwork, startled. "Grace," he said, "I thought you had gone home." She stepped closer, her eyes still on the frame. "You kept it." "I keep reminders of the things that matter," he said gently. "This one reminds me why I built all of this." Her throat tightened. "People think I do not belong here." Daniel leaned back in his chair, studying her face. "Do you believe them?" She shook her head slowly. "Not anymore." He smiled. "Good, because you have already proven you do." Grace nodded, tears threatening to spill. "Thank you for seeing me when no one else did." Daniel stood and walked around the desk, stopping just a few feet from her. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "You did not need me to see you, Grace. You just needed someone to remind you that you were never invisible." She looked at him, eyes shining. "You did more than remind me. You gave me back my life." Outside, the city lights shimmered across the windows, and the echo of distant laughter drifted through the night. Grace glanced once more at the framed bill before turning toward the door. Daniel called after her, his tone light but sincere. "Tomorrow morning, the board will meet. Be there with me. It is time they see what kindness can do." Grace smiled, the weight on her shoulders replaced by something far brighter. "I will be there." And as she walked out into the cool night air, she realized that for the first time, she was no longer running from the world. She was walking toward it. The next morning, the boardroom of the Hayes Foundation was filled with murmurs and the low hum of tension. Sunlight spilled through the glass walls, gleaming against the polished table where 10 executives sat in stiff silence. At the head of the table, Daniel Hayes stood calmly, flipping through a folder. Beside him, Grace Walker waited, her palms pressed against her notebook to hide the tremor in her hands. "This meeting," Daniel began, his tone even but firm, "is not about statistics. It is about impact. You have all seen the numbers: food distributed, shelters supported, volunteer growth, but I want you to hear from the person who made that possible." He turned to Grace and gave a small nod. "Go ahead." Grace drew in a slow breath. "Good morning," she said. Her voice was steady, though her heart pounded so loudly it felt like the room could hear it. "When we launched Open Hands, I thought success would be measured by meals served. But I learned that success is really measured by people who stand up again because someone cared enough to help them." She paused, meeting the skeptical eyes of a few board members. "I know some of you believe I am unqualified to lead this project. You are right. I did not go to business school. I did not come from wealth or power. But I know what hunger feels like. I know what it means to lose hope. And that is why I will never stop making sure others do not feel that way again." Silence followed. Even the air seemed to wait. Then Daniel spoke quietly. "That is leadership." One of the senior members, an older man named Richard, leaned forward. "It is a beautiful story, Mr. Hayes, but emotion does not sustain an enterprise. How can we trust this project to remain viable?" Before Daniel could respond, Grace opened a folder and slid a set of documents across the table. "Because kindness can be structured," she said. "We partnered with local farms, reduced supply waste by 40%, and created 43 new jobs in 3 months. This is not charity, it is sustainable growth." Daniel's lips curved slightly, proud but silent. The room shifted. Murmurs turned into quiet nods. Another member asked, "And where do you see this going?" "Next?" Grace hesitated, then said, "Every city has its own kind of hunger. We can take this nationwide, one mobile kitchen at a time." Daniel looked at her, eyes steady with approval. "You heard her. That is our next phase." When the meeting ended, the board members left one by one, their earlier doubt replaced by cautious respect. Grace stayed behind, letting the relief wash over her. She turned to Daniel, her voice soft. "I did not think they would listen." He smiled. "They listened because you spoke truth, not theory." Grace sat down, exhaling. I was terrified. So was I, Daniel admitted. But I trusted you, and you proved that trust right. The honesty in his words settled deep in her chest. She looked at him quietly, studying the man who had changed her life. Beneath the calm professionalism, there was warmth real, steady, unguarded. Later that evening, Daniel asked her to join him for a walk through the foundation's rooftop garden. The air was cool, the city skyline glowing below them. You know, he said, hands in his pockets, I started the undercover work because I was losing faith in people. Money made everything feel transactional. Until that day you gave me $10. Grace laughed softly. It was all I had. And that, Daniel said, turning to her, was what made it priceless. They stood in silence for a moment, the wind moving gently between them. Grace glanced at the city lights and whispered, It feels strange, standing here after everything. I used to look up at these buildings and wonder who lived inside. I never thought I would be one of them. Daniel's voice lowered. You are not one of them, Grace. You are better. You have not forgotten what it means to be human. Their eyes met in the glow of the skyline. No titles, no distance. Just two souls who had survived the same storm. For the first time, Grace felt something shift quietly between them, something neither of them dared to name yet. And as the city lights reflected in her eyes, Daniel whispered almost to himself, This is only the beginning. The deepest secrets are about to change everything. Subscribe now to catch the dramatic twist that is coming in the next chapter. The next week moved quickly, filled with media calls, foundation meetings, and endless congratulations. Yet beneath the polished calm of the Hayes Foundation, something darker began to stir. One afternoon, as Grace Walker reviewed progress reports in her small office, she overheard two employees whispering in the hallway. I heard the board is questioning her promotion, one said. Some think Daniel's judgment is clouded. Clouded how? The other replied. You know how. They say he is too close to her. Personally close. Grace froze. The words cut through her chest like ice. She stepped back before they could see her, her heart beat loud in her ears. All at once, the pride she had felt after the presentation turned into fear. The last thing she wanted was to be seen as someone who had climbed by favor, not by merit. That evening, she went to Daniel's office. He was sitting at his desk, reading the expansion proposal for open hands. When he looked up, his face softened. Grace, you are still here. I was going to call you. The board approved our second phase. She forced a smile. That is good news. He noticed the strain in her voice. What is wrong? Grace hesitated, then said quietly, People are talking. They think I am here because of you, not because I earned it. Daniel's expression darkened, not with anger, but with something deeper hurt. Do you believe that? She shook her head. No, but it hurts to know others do. Daniel leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. Grace, people always talk when they do not understand something pure. You built this project. You proved yourself. Let them say what they will. But what if it affects the foundation? She whispered. I do not want to ruin what you built. He stood slowly, moving closer. You could never ruin it. You are the reason it finally means something. For a moment, the room fell silent. The weight of everything unsaid hung between them, the trust, the gratitude, the growing affection neither dared to name. Grace stepped back slightly, her voice trembling. Maybe I should take a step away from the spotlight for a while. Let things calm down. Daniel shook his head. You step away. They win. Do not let fear undo what kindness has built. Grace looked at him, her throat tight. You make it sound easy. It is not easy, he said gently. But it is right. Their eyes met, steady and searching. In that quiet, unguarded space, Grace realized what frightened her was not the rumors, it was how much truth they almost carried. Because somewhere in the long hours and late-night conversations, she had begun to see him not as a CEO, not even as the man she once helped, but as someone she could lose herself to. She looked down and whispered, Thank you, Daniel. He smiled softly. Always, Grace. But as she left his office, her heart was far from calm. The line between gratitude and love was starting to blur, and she knew that when it broke, nothing would ever be the same again. The storm came quietly, the way most storms do, without warning, without mercy. 3 days after that conversation, a news article spread across every major site. Charity leader under fire accusations of favoritism at the Hayes Foundation. A grainy photo of Grace Walker and Daniel Hayes standing side by side at the rooftop event filled the headline. The caption read, "Too close for comfort?" Grace's phone buzzed nonstop. Emails poured in from reporters demanding statements, from board members asking for explanations, and from strangers throwing judgment she had never earned. She sat frozen at her desk, unable to move, staring at the words that reduced everything she had worked for into a rumor. By noon, Daniel called her into his office. He looked exhausted, his tie loosened, his usual calm replaced by quiet anger. "It is a hit piece," he said firmly. "Someone inside leaked that photo. They are trying to use it against the foundation." Grace swallowed hard. "People will believe what they want. I will fix it," he said, reaching for his phone. "I will call the press myself." She stopped him gently. "No, Daniel. That will only make it worse." He looked at her, frustration breaking through his voice. "You have worked too hard to let them destroy you. I can handle what they say about me," Grace replied softly, "but I will not let them question your integrity." For a moment, silence filled the room. Then Daniel's tone dropped, sincere and almost desperate. "Grace, I do not care what they think about me. I care about you." The words hung in the air between them. Grace's heart stumbled. "You should not say that right now," she whispered. "Why not?" he asked. "Because it will only make things harder." Daniel's expression softened, but his eyes never left hers. Harder does not mean wrong. Grace looked down, her hands trembling slightly. "I came here to make a difference, not to be the reason for a scandal." "You came here because you believed in something good," Daniel said, "and I believed in you." That evening, Grace made a decision. She went to the board privately and offered to step away from Open Hands until the investigation cleared. Daniel argued against it, but she insisted. "The project needs to survive even if I have to disappear for a while," she said quietly. The next day, headlines shifted again. Grace Walker steps down amid foundation review. Cameras flashed outside the building as she walked away, head high but heartbreaking. That night, Daniel sat alone in his office, the framed $10 bill glinting under the light. He whispered to himself, "You gave everything once, Grace, and now you are giving again." Meanwhile, across town, Grace stood by her apartment window, watching the rain fall against the glass. For the first time since she had met him, she felt truly alone again. But deep inside, she knew that kindness was never wasted. It always found its way back, even through the hardest storms. And this storm was not the end. It was only testing how strong they had become. 2 months passed before the storm began to calm. The investigation found no misconduct, no misuse of funds, only jealousy and misinterpretation. By the time the truth came out, the headlines had already moved on to other scandals. But for Grace Walker, the silence that followed felt heavier than the noise that came before. She had left the Hayes Foundation quietly, avoiding reporters and cameras. Her days became simple, again helping at small local shelters, volunteering where she could, finding peace in quiet service. Yet every time she passed a food truck painted in bright orange and yellow, her chest ached. Open Hands continued without her, and that was all she had ever wanted. Still, she missed it, missed him. One afternoon, as she packed food boxes for a neighborhood drive, a familiar voice came from behind her. "You have been avoiding my calls, Grace." Her heart stopped. She turned and saw Daniel Hayes standing by the doorway. No suit, no entourage, just a soft smile that felt like home. "Daniel," she breathed, "you should not be here." "Then where should I be?" he asked gently. "Because everywhere I go, I still end up looking for you." Grace lowered her gaze. "The foundation needs distance from me, from us. The foundation is fine," he said, stepping closer. "It was built to survive storms, but I am not fine without you." For the first time in weeks, she met his eyes. They were the same calm blue she remembered from that rainy day, the same eyes that had once looked up from under a soaked hood, asking for $10 and receiving far more. "I thought you forgot about me," she whispered. Daniel shook his head. "I could never forget the person who taught me what kindness really means." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small glass frame. Inside, pressed and preserved, was the same crumpled $10 bill she had given him at the train station. "I kept it," he said softly. "It reminds me that love starts where pride ends." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "Daniel." He stepped closer, his voice low and sure. "You gave me a second chance at life. Now let me give you one at happiness." Grace let out a shaky laugh. "You are still terrible at being subtle." He smiled. "Then I will be clear." He took her hands in his. "I love you, Grace. I have since the day you looked at a stranger and saw a human being instead of a burden." Tears rolled down her cheeks as she whispered, "I love you too." Daniel exhaled, relief and joy blending into a quiet smile. "Come back with me. Open hands needs its heart." She nodded, unable to speak. And when he wrapped his arms around her, the noise of the world disappeared. Later that evening, they stood together beside one of the open hands trucks as the sunset washed the city in gold. Grace traced her fingers over the painted logo and smiled. "You know," she said, "it all began with $10. Daniel looked at her tenderly. "And it ended with something money can never buy. Thank you for joining us for this cinematic adventure. If you want more untold or real stories of billionaire love and redemption, please subscribe and choose your next true heart journey on your screen now."